Princess Larneth Valsora had spent 3 long cycles studying the species called humans, and she believed she understood them completely. But she was about to discover how wrong she truly was. The Volanthe Empire had watched Earth from the shadows for many generations, sending invisible probes and intercepting radio signals and analyzing everything they could find about these strange creatures who lived on a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy. The reports all said the same thing, that humans were weak and primitive and emotional, and not worth the attention of a great empire like the Volanthe. So when her father, the Emperor, decided it was finally time to make contact with Earth, he sent Larneth because meeting with lesser species was considered beneath the dignity of more important royals. She did not mind this insult, because she was curious about these humans even if she would never admit it to anyone. Her diplomatic ship descended through the darkness of space toward the human station called Gateway, a small metal structure that floated above the blue planet like a toy. Larneth checked her appearance in a mirror before departing, smoothing her iridescent scales and adjusting the golden rings on her forearms. She stood 7 feet tall, with eyes that shifted between violet and silver, depending on her mood. And she knew she was impressive by any standard in the known universe. Her entourage consisted of 12 advisors and guards, all of them proud Volanthe, who believed they were about to meet inferior beings who would bow and scrape before them. When the shuttle doors opened and Larneth stepped onto the human station, she expected to see trembling diplomats and nervous leaders eager to impress her. Instead, she found a small group of only 5 humans in matching uniforms standing calmly in the docking bay at the front. Of this tiny group stood a human male of average height, with dark brown skin and small scars along his jaw and neck. He did not bow and he did not tremble, and he did not look even slightly impressed by her royal presence. Sergeant First Class Marcus Cole, he said in a steady voice that showed no fear. "Welcome to Gateway Station, Your Highness." Larneth felt her upper lip curl with displeasure, because they had sent a common soldier to greet a princess of the greatest empire in 3 galaxies. "I expected to meet with your planetary leadership," she said coldly. Marcus Cole simply nodded once without any sign of apology or shame. "President Hawkins sends her regards," he replied. "She is currently managing a humanitarian crisis in the Pacific region where millions of lives are at stake, and she figured you would understand." Larneth did not know how to respond to this because no one had ever spoken to her in such a manner. Her advisor, Karth, leaned close to whisper in her ear about the terrible insult they had received and how they should leave immediately and report this disrespect to the Emperor. But Larneth raised one of her hands to silence him because she was looking at this human soldier more carefully. Now she noticed how he stood without any trace of fear in his body. She noticed the strange calmness in his dark eyes that seemed to suggest he had seen things far more frightening than an alien princess. She noticed the scars on his face and neck that told stories she suddenly wanted to hear. Your leader prioritizes her own people over a meeting with the Volanthe Empire? Larneth asked with genuine surprise in her voice. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied simply. "That is her job." Something shifted inside Larneth at that moment. Something she could not name or understand. Among the Volanthe, leaders always put diplomacy and politics above the needs of common people, because that was how power worked. But this human was telling her that the most powerful person on Earth had chosen to help ordinary citizens instead of meeting with representatives of a superior civilization. "And what is your job, Sergeant Cole?" she asked. "Right now my job is making sure you are comfortable and have everything you need while you are a guest," he said. And something almost like warmth entered his expression. "Also, I am supposed to give you a tour. And there is a decent cafeteria on Deck 7. where the coffee is terrible, but the pie is pretty good. Lyraneth stared at him in complete confusion because she had been prepared for groveling and flattery and desperate attempts to impress her. She had not been prepared for a soldier who talked about pie. Korath made a disgusted sound behind her and muttered something about human primitiveness. But Lyraneth ignored him. "Very well, Sergeant Cole," she said. "You may show me this cafeteria of yours." Marcus nodded and turned to lead the way, walking with a confident stride that suggested he did not care at all that he was in the presence of royalty. Lyraneth followed him with her entourage trailing behind, and she realized that her hearts were beating faster than normal. She told herself it was because she was annoyed by human rudeness and nothing more. But deep inside, where she kept her most secret thoughts, Princess Lyraneth Velsora knew that something important had just begun. She simply did not know yet what it would cost her, or what it would give her in return. The doors closed behind them and the tour began. And everything Lyraneth thought she knew about humans was about to change forever. 3 days passed on Gateway Station, and the Volanti delegation grew more bored and more condescending with each passing hour. Korath and the other advisors whispered among themselves about human primitiveness and the absurdity of treating these creatures as anything close to equals. They wanted to end the mission early and return home with a recommendation that Earth be ignored in all future expansion plans. But Princess Lyraneth found herself more fascinated with each new thing she learned about these strange beings. She requested additional tours and asked to observe human soldiers during their training exercises. She sat quietly in the back of rooms where military officers debated strategy with a frankness that would have been absolutely unthinkable in the Volanti court. Humans argued constantly, and they questioned their superiors openly, and they disagreed with passion and volume. And yet, when decisions were finally made, they worked together with remarkable speed and efficiency. It made no sense to her, and she loved trying to understand it. Marcus Cole remained her primary guide throughout all of this. He answered her endless questions without ever making her feel stupid for asking them. He explained human customs without apologizing for them. And sometimes he made her laugh with observations that were both honest and surprisingly wise. "Your advisors do not like me very much," he remarked one afternoon as they walked through the observation deck. "They believe you are beneath my station," Lyraneth admitted before she could stop herself. "Are you supposed to tell me that?" Marcus asked with amusement in his voice. "Probably not," she replied, and she found herself smiling in a way her face had not done for a very long time. "I find that I care less about protocol than I once did." It was exactly then that the alarms began to sound. Red emergency lights flashed across the observation deck, and human personnel rushed past them with urgent but controlled movements. Marcus touched the communication device attached to his ear and listened with a serious expression. "We have a situation," he said quickly. "Unknown vessel approaching at high speed and not responding to our calls. So we need to get you to a secure location right now." "I will remain here," Lyraneth declared. "With respect, Your Highness, that is absolutely not happening." She drew herself up to her full 7-foot height and folded all 4 of her arms across her chest. "Sergeant Cole, I have commanded fleets in battle," she said firmly. "I will not cower in a shelter while others face danger." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them that went beyond words. Then he nodded once. "Fine, but you stay behind me and you do exactly what I say," he told her. "Those are my terms. Acceptable." The unknown vessel turned out to be a raider ship crewed by pirates from a species called Krath. They preyed on isolated stations and outposts across the galaxy, taking supplies and leaving destruction behind them. Somehow they had evaded detection until they were almost on top of Gateway Station. And now they were demanding surrender. "They want our supplies," the station commander explained to the gathered officers. Admiral Patricia Webb was a stern woman with gray hair and eyes like cold steel. "Food and medical equipment and fuel," She continued. They have threatened to destroy the station if we do not comply within the hour. How many fighters on their ship? Marcus asked. Scans suggest approximately 50 combat personnel. And how many do we have? 32 security officers plus. Standard crew with basic combat training. Korath stepped forward with his expression full of superiority. The Volanti delegation demands immediate evacuation. He announced, This is not our conflict, and we refuse to be endangered by human incompetence. Admiral Webb's face did not change even slightly. We can have a shuttle prepared for you within 20 minutes, she said calmly. That would be acceptable. Korath replied with obvious relief. Lurineth felt something cold settle in her stomach as she looked at her advisors and saw their eagerness to flee. Then she looked at Marcus Cole, who was already studying tactical displays with his fellow soldiers, preparing to defend this station against impossible odds. No, she said loudly. Everyone turned to stare at her. Highness, Korath asked with confusion. The Volanti delegation will remain, Lurineth declared as she stepped forward to stand beside Marcus. I will not flee while others fight. Your Highness the Emperor would never approve of this, Korath protested. We are diplomats, not soldiers, and this is a human problem. Then it is now a Volanti problem as well. Lurineth replied firmly. She met Admiral Webb's eyes directly. How may we assist? She asked. The Admiral raised one eyebrow, and then slowly she smiled. Can your guards shoot? She asked. They are among the finest warriors in the entire Empire. Then give them weapons and point them at the airlocks, Admiral Webb ordered. Sergeant Cole, you are in charge of boarding defense, and the princess and her people are under your command. Marcus turned to Lurineth with barely hidden disbelief on his scarred face. You are absolutely sure about this? He asked. Quite sure. Lurineth replied with a small smile. You told me that humans are stubborn, but perhaps you are not the only stubborn ones in this galaxy. Marcus stared at her for another moment, and then he grinned. All right then, he said. Let us show these pirates what happens when they mess with our station. Lurineth felt her heart pounding with excitement and fear, and something else she could not name, for the first time in her long and privileged life. She was about to fight alongside beings her people considered inferior, and she could not wait to see what would happen next. The tour of Gateway Station was nothing like what Princess Lurineth had expected, and with every passing hour she found herself more confused and more fascinated by these strange humans. Marcus Cole walked her through corridors that buzzed with activity and noise and life in ways that seemed completely chaotic to her Volanti eyes. Humans of every possible variety moved around them in all directions. Some tall and some short, some with pale skin and some with dark skin. Some young and some old. They laughed loudly and argued with passion and bumped into each other without apology. And somehow they still managed to get their work done. How do you maintain order in this place? Korath asked with obvious disdain in his voice. There appears to be no visible hierarchy in daily interactions. Marcus shrugged in that casual way. Humans seem to do everything. There is a hierarchy, he explained. We just do not spend all day reminding each other about it. Because people know their jobs and they do them without being told. They passed a large window that looked out over Earth. And Lurineth stopped walking without meaning to the planet hung in the blackness of space like a jewel. Blue and green and wrapped in swirling white clouds. It was small and fragile and completely unremarkable by galactic standards. And yet something about it made her chest feel tight. It is quite pretty, she admitted quietly. Marcus stood beside her and looked at his home world with an expression she could not quite understand. There was softness in his eyes, but also something fierce and protective. Like a parent watching over a sleeping child, we fought a lot of wars over that little ball of dirt, he said in a low voice, against each other mostly. And for a long time we were our own worst enemy. And now, Lurineth asked, Now we are trying to do better, he replied. And he glanced at her with what might have been a challenge in his gaze. Emphasis on trying. They continued walking, and Marcus showed her the medical bay where human doctors worked alongside machines to heal wounded personnel. He showed her the engineering section, where teens maintained the station with a combination of advanced technology and something he called creative problem solving. A young woman with red hair was explaining a problem to them while pointing at a panel on the wall. This conduit keeps overheating, she said cheerfully. We are supposed to get a replacement part next month. But in the meantime, Petty Officer Ruiz figured out that if we wrap it in wet towels and point a fan at it, the thing works fine. Lirineth stared at her in disbelief. You are cooling advanced technology with wet fabric, she asked. Whatever works, ma'am. The woman replied with a bright smile as they walked away. Lirineth struggled to maintain her composure because the Volanthi would never accept such improvisation. Their technology was precise, and their procedures were exact, and no one would ever dream of solving a problem with wet towels. But these humans seemed completely unconcerned with elegance or proper methods. They only cared about results. Your species is very strange, Lirineth told Marcus. I have heard that before, he said, without any offense in his voice. They reached the cafeteria on deck 7, and Marcus guided her to a table near another window. Her guards positioned themselves around the room with their hands on their weapons, watching for threats that were not coming. The humans in the cafeteria glanced at the aliens with curiosity, but then simply continued eating their meals as if 7-foot-tall, 4-armed princesses showed up. Every day, a server brought coffee and pie, and Lirineth examined the slice in front of her with suspicion. Apple, Marcus explained, from a tree, and the fruit is safe for your biology because we checked. She took a small bite, and the sweetness surprised her. And she found that she did not hate it. Sergeant Cole, she said after a moment of chewing. May I ask you a personal question? Go ahead. The scars on your face and neck. How did you receive them? Marcus touched his jaw briefly in what seemed like an unconscious gesture. War, he said simply. About 8 years ago, I was in a city called Mosul when a building collapsed on my unit. And I was one of the lucky ones. Lucky, Lirineth repeated with confusion. I survived, he explained without any self-pity in his voice. 3 of my friends did not. She set down her fork because among the Volanthi displaying evidence of injury was considered shameful. Warriors who carried visible scars were often sent away to remote posts where they would not offend the sensibilities of the royal court. Yet here was this human wearing his scars openly and speaking of his near death without any shame at all. You do not hide them, she observed. Why would I? Marcus replied while taking a sip of his coffee and making a face at the taste. I told you the coffee was terrible, but anyway, those scars are part of my story. And the people I lost and the things I learned are all connected to them. So hiding them would be like pretending none of it happened. What did you learn? Lirineth asked softly. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he looked at her directly. That humans are stubborn, he said. That we break, and we put ourselves back together. That we lose people we love, and we keep going anyway. That we make terrible mistakes, and we try to do better tomorrow. He shrugged again in that casual human way. I do not know if that sounds stupid to a princess from a fancy space empire. No, Lirineth said quietly as something warm spread through her chest. It does not sound stupid at all. And in that moment, she realized that everything her reports had told her about humans was completely and utterly wrong. The Krath pirates came through 3 airlocks at the same time because they expected minimal resistance and easy prey. They found neither Marcus had positioned his defenders in overlapping fields of fire, with the Volante guards working alongside. Human fire teams. The first wave of attackers was cut down before they could take more than a few steps into the station. The second wave pushed harder, but fared only slightly better. Lirineth had taken a plasma pistol from one of her guards, a weapon she had trained with since childhood. She crouched behind a metal barricade beside Marcus and fired at the twisted gray forms of Krath raiders as they poured through the breach in the hull. The noise was deafening, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. "You are a good shot," Marcus observed between bursts of gunfire from his own weapon. "You sound surprised." Lirineth replied, "Princesses usually are not good at shooting things. I am not a usual princess." A Krath warrior broke through the defensive line and charged directly toward their position with a serrated blade raised high above its head. The creature was massive and covered in gray scales, and it screamed with fury as it ran. Marcus stepped forward without hesitation and met the attack head-on. He blocked the blade with his rifle and drove his shoulder hard into the creature's chest. They went down together and rolled across the deck in a tangle of limbs and weapons. Lirineth was moving before she even realized what she was doing. She raised her pistol and fired twice, and the Krath went still. Marcus pushed the body off himself and looked up at her with blood on his face that was not all from the alien. "Thanks," he said simply. "You are welcome," she replied, and she offered him one of her hands. He took it and allowed her to pull him back to his feet. For just a moment, their hands remained clasped together, and something passed between them that neither could have explained. Then the fighting resumed, and there was no more time for anything except survival. The battle lasted 47 minutes, according to the station's records. When it finally ended, 11 Krath raiders lay dead in the corridors, and the rest had retreated to their damaged ship. The pirate vessel limped away at low speed, with smoke pouring from its engines, and no more threats coming from its communication channels. Human casualties were remarkably light, with only 3 wounded and none dead. The Volante guards had fought with honor and skill, and even Korath was forced to admit quietly that the humans had performed admirably. But Lirineth barely heard any of the reports being given around her. She was watching Marcus Cole as he moved among his people in the aftermath of violence. He checked injuries with gentle hands and offered words of encouragement to exhausted soldiers. He helped carry wounded comrades toward the medical bay without being asked. His uniform was torn and stained with blood and soot, and his face was covered in sweat and grime. He looked absolutely exhausted. He looked absolutely magnificent. "Sergeant Cole," she called out. He turned, and when he saw her, something in his expression softened in a way that made her heart beat faster. "Your Highness," he said as he walked toward her. "Are you okay?" "I am uninjured," she assured him. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" he asked with genuine confusion. "You saved my life back there. I wanted to thank you for showing me what humans truly are," she said seriously. She stepped closer to him without caring that her guards and advisors were watching. "My intelligence reports describe your species as primitive and emotional and fragile," she continued. "Those reports were completely wrong." "Well, we are definitely emotional," Marcus admitted with a tired smile. "And fragile too, because a lot of things can kill us pretty easily. And yet you fight anyway," Lirineth said with wonder in her voice. "You protect strangers and you stand against impossible odds simply because it is the right thing to do." "Yeah, well," Marcus shrugged in that casual way she was beginning to find endearing. "That is kind of our thing, I guess." Lirineth reached out and touched his face with one of her hands. It was a gesture so intimate by Volante standards that she heard Korath gasp somewhere behind her. She traced the scars along his jaw and felt the texture of wounds that had healed long ago. "My people believe that strength means never showing weakness," she said quietly. "We believe that power means standing above others and looking down on those beneath us." She paused and looked into his dark eyes. "But you, Marcus Cole, have shown me a different kind of strength. She continued, the strength to be vulnerable, and the strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and the strength to keep fighting when everything seems lost. Marcus stood very still beneath her touch. Your Highness. He began. Lyraneth, she corrected him gently. My name is Lyraneth. Lyraneth, he said carefully, as if testing how the word felt in his mouth. I am not sure what you want me to say right now. I do not want you to say anything, she replied. I only want you to understand something important. She let her hand fall from his face, but did not step away. When I return to my father's court, I will tell him the truth about humanity, she declared. I will tell him that you are not lesser beings to be conquered or ignored. That you are warriors and dreamers and stubborn, foolish, magnificent creatures who deserve respect. She turned to face her advisors, who were staring at her with expressions of shock and horror. The Volanthi Empire will not treat humanity as a primitive species, she announced in a voice that rang with royal authority. We will treat them as equals and as potential allies, and I will personally oversee all negotiations to establish formal diplomatic relations. The Emperor will never agree to this. Koreth protested weakly. Lyraneth smiled, and it was not a gentle expression. The Emperor will agree because I will make him understand, she said. And if he does not, then perhaps it is time for our empire to change. Behind her, Marcus Cole stood in his torn and bloody uniform and watched her with something like awe in his tired eyes. And Lyraneth realized that she had never felt more powerful than she did in this moment. Standing in a damaged corridor surrounded by the aftermath of battle, having finally discovered what true strength looked like. The Volanthi delegation remained on Gateway Station for 2 more weeks after the battle with the Krath pirates. Official negotiations began between the two species, and treaties were drafted and debated and revised countless times. The first steps toward an interstellar alliance were taken carefully, and slowly Lyraneth threw herself into the work with energy she had never shown for diplomatic duties before she discovered that humans were just as stubborn in negotiation as they were in combat. They refused to accept any terms they considered unfair, and they advocated loudly for smaller species who had no voice at the table. They insisted on provisions for mutual defense and cultural exchange and equal treatment. It was absolutely infuriating. It was also exhilarating in ways she had never experienced. These negotiations were nothing like the ones she had conducted with other spacefaring civilizations in those meetings. The Volanthi's superior power meant their terms were accepted without question or complaint. But humans questioned everything and complained constantly, and somehow made her respect them more for it. Throughout all of this, Marcus Cole remained nearby. He had been officially assigned as her permanent liaison, a position that allowed him to escort her to meetings and share meals with her in the cafeteria. They spent long hours talking about everything from military tactics to human literature to the nature of courage and honor. She found herself looking forward to those conversations more than she was willing to admit to anyone. On the final day before her scheduled departure, they stood together on the observation deck where they had first heard the alarms announcing the pirate attack. Earth hung in the viewport below them, beautiful and fragile and burning with the fierce light of a species that refused to surrender. I will miss this view, Lyraneth said softly. You could stay, Marcus replied in a carefully neutral voice. No, she said with sadness she could not hide. I could not stay even if I wanted to, because my place is among my people, and I must return to the Empire to make sure that what we have started here continues. And after that, he asked. After that I will return, she said, and she allowed herself to step closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body through her robes. The negotiations will require many visits over the coming years, she continued. Perhaps decades of work to build true friendship between our peoples, and I will need a liaison who understands both Volanthi and humans. Marcus looked at her with an expression she had learned to read over these past weeks. She could see hope in his eyes that he was trying to control. She could see longing that he was trying to hide. Humans felt their emotions so deeply and displayed them so openly, even when they thought they were being subtle. "I would like that," he said quietly. "So would I," she replied. She reached up and touched his face again, and this time he leaned into her palm. This time, when her guards looked away in embarrassment, she did not care what they thought. "Humans have a saying," she told him. "Something about absence making the heart grow fonder." "We have a lot of sayings," Marcus said with a small smile. "Most of them are pretty sappy and romantic. I find that I do not mind sappy and romantic things anymore," she admitted. "When I am gone, Sergeant Marcus Cole, will your heart grow fonder for me?" He laughed, and it was a sound she had come to treasure more than all the wealth of her father's empire. "Princess Lurineth Velsora," he said, "my heart has been fond of you since the day you refused to let me take you to a shelter during the attack. That was very stubborn of me," she acknowledged. "Yeah, it really was," he agreed, "and I liked it a lot." She kissed him then. It was a brief, gentle press of her lips against his that meant nothing by human standards, but meant everything by Volanti ones. He went very still for a moment, and then his hand came up to cradle the back of her head and hold her close for just a heartbeat longer. When they finally stepped apart, she saw tears glistening in his eyes. Humans and their beautiful emotions. Humans and their vulnerable, unashamed hearts that felt everything so deeply. "I will return," she promised him. "I will be here waiting," he replied with that scarred smile she had come to love. Probably still drinking terrible coffee and eating pretty good pie. She laughed out loud in front of her guards and advisors and anyone else who might be watching. Princess Lurineth Velsora of the mighty Volanti Empire laughed with pure joy and did not care who heard her. As her shuttle departed from Gateway Station an hour later, she stood at the viewport and watched Earth grow smaller. Behind her, somewhere on that little blue planet, a species that should have been insignificant was building ships and dreaming of stars and preparing to take its rightful place among the great powers of the galaxy. Somewhere on that station, a human soldier with scars on his face and stubbornness in his soul was watching her leave and counting the days until she would return. Lurineth pressed one of her hands against the cold glass of the viewport and smiled. She had come to Earth expecting to meet primitive creatures who would bow before her superior civilization. Instead, she had found warriors and dreamers, and a soldier who had taught her what true strength really meant. She had found something she had never expected to find in all her long years of royal duty. She had found hope, and as the stars stretched before her ship and the long journey home began, Princess Lurineth Velsora of the Volanti Empire was already counting the days until she could return to Gateway Station, until she could return to Earth, until she could return to him